Have you seen MTV Cribs? If you haven't seen MTV Cribs, let me give you just a little bit on this masterpiece. Famous folks, celebrities, actors, musicians, they would invite you over to their mansions and you can take a tour of all of the bedrooms, of all of the game rooms, the huge basements, the garages full of cars. Honestly, some of them were nice tours. Today, I'm going to give you the Cribs tour of Cisco ISE. Before we start creating policy, before we start playing around with ICE, it's important just to get to know ICE. Where are things? So today's video is simply going to be a tour of where things are. Let's click around. Let's get familiar with Identity Services Engine. It's different, especially if you're coming from a different system or if you're coming from, let's say, ICE 2.4. It looks different. So it's important to get familiar and see where things are. I am running ICE 3.3 patch 4, which at the time of this video being recorded, it is the gold star. It is the recommended release out there on the portal. However, we also have ICE 3.4. We have different versions of ICE that you might have installed or you will be installing. So at least at the time of this video being recorded, 3.3 patch 4, it is the recommended release, and that is what I am running. We have a dashboard here. A dashboard is always important. It's something you can display in an operations center. It gives you information of what's going on with your environment. How many endpoints do you have? What are the active endpoints that are out there? Operating systems, different devices, the alarms in your ecosystem. So what is going on with your ICE deployment? What's happening with your nodes? If you remember from last week, I have one single node. This is a standalone deployment of ICE that I have here in the lab, but you might have many nodes depending on the size of your organization. Either way, this is a place that you can customize dashboards and you can display. It gives you good information. If we go over to the left side, we'll see context visibility, information on the endpoints, information on the users that have authenticated the network devices. Those are the devices that your users are authenticating to. The switches, the routers, the access points that are out there, what are they authenticating to? You'll see that information there, as well as information on the applications. If I click on endpoints, you'll see the list of endpoints I have out there. Pretty much everything that I'm doing in my lab right now is MAC authenticated. We're going to change that up. We're going to do a little bit more 802.1x later on as we record in the different videos. But for now, I'm doing very simple policy, just MAB. But you can do so much with ICE, and that's what we want to explore, and that's what we want to spend some more time on in a different video. If we go over to the left side, operations. This is where you might spend a good amount of time finding out information about what's happening with the authentication. Who is authenticating? What is happening? Is it successful? If we take a look at Radius and we go to live logs, we'll see information on that single endpoint that I have out there, which is my phone has been authenticated there to an SSID here in the lab. And let's say I'm just trying to find out what information is coming from this device. How did it authenticate? What policy it hit? I can see all that information here. So if you're spending time creating a policy, especially the first time, you're probably going to be playing around and fine-tuning that policy. And you might have devices that don't hit that policy. You might want to dig into the whys that is happening. Do you have the right conditions out there for those devices to hit that policy? What are the results? There's a lot of questions to ask. And those answers might be found here in the live logs for Radius, because you can see information there, how they are authenticating. Is it an Active Directory group you're not expecting that's trying to authenticate? What is happening to those endpoints? You'll see that information here. So you will spend some time in the live logs. Under operations as well, you'll see TACACS. So this is device administration. You can do device administration with Cisco ISE. So if you're trying to authenticate into a switch, to a router, a firewall, infrastructure, you're just doing device admin, you can do that with Cisco ISE. And some people deploy Cisco ISE just for device admin, and then another installation of Cisco ISE for the Radius, the authentication of users. Some organizations split that function into two different ecosystems. That works. But that is something that you can do with Cisco ISE is TACACS, device administration. The other place where you'll spend a good amount of time is under the policy. That's where the fun happens. We can see here we have a couple different options. The policy sets, that's the conditions coming together, the results. You're putting together a policy. How do you want people to authenticate? That happens there. Then you have the profiling options, posturing if you want to use that. That's all found there. If we take a look at the policy sets as an example, as I mentioned, very simple. I'm just doing MAC address authentication. We have our policy set there. We can see there's a couple of hits. We'll click on view. I want devices that I know about, those MAC addresses, are going to be listed somewhere. Those are the devices that I want to authenticate into my lab environment. Obviously, you can spoof a MAC address. Out there in the wild, you might have some MAB that is set up, but that might not be the only thing you have, and that shouldn't be the only thing you have. But here in the lab over the coming weeks, we're going to change that up. We're going to do a little bit more 802.1x. But as you can see there, how are these devices authenticating? I want to find these endpoints in my internal database. And what is the authorization there? What do I want? Who do I want to authenticate? I pretty much want just these DAVnet devices to authenticate. Anything that's in there, permit access. If it's not in there, deny access. Very simple policy. We want to change this up over time. So what makes up a policy? And that's something that we'll find under policy as well. Those elements, those components are found here. So if we take a look at conditions and results, conditions are the who. The who is authenticating, what's happening on my network, who's coming in over wireless, who's coming in over wired, how are they coming in? So the who and the how. And then we have the results is the what. What's going to happen when this person tries to authenticate? Do you want to block them? Do you want to allow it? What access should they have? What VLAN should you dump them on? That's the what. So that's the results. And the dictionaries are really the components within the conditions, the MAB, the different components. And we'll talk about that over the coming weeks. But these elements create a policy. And you'll spend some time in there, perhaps customizing, creating some of your own items. That's found under policy. Let's take a look at administration. This is managing your deployment. So managing your ecosystem, your nodes, assigning personas. If you want to enable device administration, it happens here. If you want to enable PX Grid, it happens here. If you're doing MDM with Meraki Systems Manager with Intune, that happens here. That connectivity happens here. Active Directory, that external identity source, you're going to configure it here. So that part happens under administration. Your licensing, there's certificates. Everybody loves certificates. You're going to manage those certificates here under administration. If you're going to do upgrades, some patching, everything happens under administration. So you'll also spend some time there under administration. Let's go over to work centers. Work centers, I would say, are dedicated spaces that have been put together to organize the missions that you might have. For example, TrustSec. If you're trying to do some segmentation in your environment and you want TrustSec to be a part of that, you would come here and you would have all the components that you need for TrustSec, all the policy, everything is under one place. And if you click on Overview, that'll walk you through what are those components that you need. What do you have to have in place before you create a TrustSec policy, before you go into the matrix and say who can talk to who. You need AAA servers. That's important. So it'll give you the components, the preliminary setup. It'll tell you what to do with them. Those components are going to be used in a policy. And then from there, you'll be able to take it into production, right? Or in a lab. But it walks you through everything and it puts everything in a dedicated space that you can find. And there are work centers for guest access, for BYOD. Depending on what you're trying to do, if you're doing TACACS, device administration, you'll have a work center there. It at least walks you through those things. So spend some time in there because you might find that there's something that you want to work on, let's say device administration, for instance, and you're interested in doing TACACS, you'll find that information here. What do you need? That's all here. So we will spend some time in some of these areas over the coming weeks. Hopefully this MTV Cribs tour was worthwhile. There, as you can see, there is so much within Identity Services Engine. go read some release notes. There's a lot of great documentation on Cisco.com. But let's spend some time doing some magic with Identity Services Engine. Thank you.